This gameplay video is brought to you by very generous patron Shuffles. Purphoros versus Seeker. No means of ramping out our commander. We do have some tokens to get down into our commander once we actually do manage to get it into play though. We are on the play, so get down our mountain first and hope for some fast mana, or at the very least some ramp for our Purphoros. Assuming that this is the prismatic bridge, we don't want to give our opponent all the time in the world to get into their commander, playing out a tricycle land tapped on turn 1. Okay, and we've at least got a third land to make here, so I'll hold off on the token production until we do get our commander down. And there is some ramp in Talisman of Resilience, and a Wheel of Fortune is tempting. If we don't get into a land next turn, might have to go for the Wheel of Fortune, not going to go for it here though. And Chaos Warp is pretty risky on the rock, assuming that this is a prismatic bridge deck, because there'll be lots of scary planeswalkers and creatures in the deck, I imagine. Another Signet, so they are making 5 colours with the World Tree. Once they get 3 more lands into play, the World Tree will switch on. Another Talisman, so we weren't going to keep them off getting down a bunch of mana anyway. Okay, a Goblin Matron can get us into the Sacrifice Goblin that makes red mana. I forget the name of it. The Skirk Prospector, so can get that down next turn. Going way too slow for my liking, but we'll be able to see the Seeker do some stuff at least. And our opponent makes all 5 colours, so we see the Prismatic Bridge. Nothing we're going to do about that in a mono-red deck. They do have blue mana held up, so could have a counterspell. And yeah, there's a chain reaction, so unfortunately just have to continue to go slow and throw out the Skirk Prospector. Could get down our commander here, which is tempting, but I think we just have to get down our commander next turn. Our opponent flips into an Ugin, and this is exactly why I didn't want my opponent to be given so much time here. So sacrificing a bunch of stuff in response to the board wipe here will get rid of the Goblin Matron. The Skirk Prospector can sacrifice itself, and we might as well go Chaos Warp onto... yeah, we'll do it on the Ugin. Can't flip into something much worse than an Ugin. Alright, revealing a Wheel of Fortune on top of our opponent's library, curiously. And then they actually get to play their turn. That is a Vorinclex, so our opponent has well and truly won here. No 4th land for us by turn 6. So, like I said, we've already lost this one, but we might as well play the Wheel of Fortune just for the fun of it. It was a good hand if we could have got into the mana. There is a Nykthos. Vandal Blast isn't going to do much for us, so I'll just play out the land and pass here. We see a Jingataxius, the Great Synthesis now, from the Prismatic Bridge. And there is an Animate Dead. They got rid of Eleshnorm, Mother of Machines, with the wheel effect. We saw the back of an Austere command, Echo Dharma's Reach, and there's a couple of lands in there as well. So all that wheel did really was allow our opponent to beat us faster, which we knew when we cast it. 7 damage from Vorinclex. And 3 of our lands are put to sleep because a green card can do that for some reason. Now we see an Ancient Tomb. So we could go Seething Song into the Purphoros. So let's do that here. We'll untap 3 of our lands next turn. 5 mana from the Seething Song. Test our opponent on some counter magic here. Managing to land that, and then it can be Vandal Blast. We'll just put it on... yeah, the Simic Signet, try and hurt their blue mana a little bit. They do have the World Tree switched on now, so they've got all their colours from the lands anyway. Just trying to use the floating mana for the sake of it. And then flashing down a Jingataxius Core Augur, so we have to discard our entire hand at the end of the turn. And they will draw 7 at the end of theirs. This obviously looks like a prayer to tribal build. Our opponent gets straight into the Ugin again, which was shuffled into the library from the Chaos Warp, of course. So getting whacked for a huge amount again, and we likely lose on their next turn. And as if they weren't going to draw enough cards, there is a Sphinx's Revelation, so they go 2 north of their starting life total and up to 11 cards. And then deciding to flip round into the Saga, so they have no max hand size with that. 21 cards in their hand. And now seeing a Demonic Tutor. And then ending the turn with 28 cards in hand, and now we rip a land straight off the top, which is multiple turns too late. We'll pass over to our opponent and see how they can beat us. Flipping into Ulamog, the Infinite Gaia, which does not have an ETB effect. It's a cast trigger, so that's simply a big 10-10 Annihilator. So they just decide to turn in sideways and knock us down to -7. Try again, shall we? Looks like we're up against another strong deck here versus Thrasios and Tevesh Sat. But we can get down a reasonably fast commander, so let's keep this one. Get down the Shatter Skull down tapped so that we don't have to take 3 life. Alright, and we get into an enabler in Goblin Instigator, so yeah, I don't think there's anything we're doing on turn 3, so we might as well get down the tap land in the Boseiju. Luckily our commander is only a single red, so we can go for the Ancient Tomb next turn into the Purphoros. Our opponent throws out the Thrasios, probably hoping that we're not going to get into our commander next turn. That is another mountain. So it's Ancient Tomb into our commander. And that's going to cost us 4 life due to our pain lands here, but I think it's worth getting down the Purphoros, see if our opponent has any free counter magic. Wouldn't surprise me, but luckily not. Taking 1 damage from the Thrasios, and they get down an Ancient Tomb of their own. And we get into another mountain, so throw that down. We've got 3, 4, 5 mana available to us here. So I think it just has to be the Goblin Instigator. Would be nice to get down the Torbran, but we're struggling on red mana. If I'd known I was going to keep drawing into mountains, I wouldn't have gone for the Boseiju. But the Goblin Instigator does come down with a token, so that is 4 damage to our opponent off the Purphoros, and just a case of trying to outrace our opponent at this point. They go for the Scry with the Thrasios at the end of our turn, so do take more damage to the Ancient Tomb. Managed to get themselves into a land off that as well. And then taking some more damage to the Bloodstained Maya. And that is a Mind Twist from our opponent. And just a land, so let's see here. I think this is 3 mana to activate. Yeah, we might be able to trick our opponent into blocking here. Sometimes people forget about the activated ability on the Purphoros, but our opponent not falling for it. And then a Toxic Deluge, so wiping out our tokens. Then a Mana Dork after that. Not missing the land drops, so 4 cards in hand, 3 mana available. And the second main phase gets into an Oko. So hopefully our opponent can start winning at some point here. A Valakut for us, so yeah, we can top deck lands apparently. Our opponent just making food tokens with the Oko, and we can't stop top decking into lands. Yeah, we've got a lot of goblins in the deck, hence the reason the Cavern of Souls is in here. Obviously this isn't a very competitive deck. It can go off quite quickly if we get the right draws, and we ultimately want to be getting fast mana into our Purphoros, so obviously that's not happening here. Thrasios going to be activated twice at the end of our turn. Oh, actually, deciding to activate it once and then sacrificing the 2 food tokens, making another food with the Oko, so putting that up to 10 loyalty. And now we see a Ledger Shredder as well, followed by the other commander in Tevesh Sat is the second spell. So discarding a Thoughtseize to the Ledger Shredder, and the Tevesh Sat makes a couple of Thrall tokens, taking 1 damage from the Thrasios. Alright, a Krenko's command is a little bit more damage. Let's just throw that down. Obviously dealing 4 damage there when the Goblin tokens enter, and we'll hold up the Anthem effect on the Purphoros, which we can activate twice here. Another food token for Oko. Tevesh Sat sacrificing a creature to draw a couple of cards, so getting rid of a Thrall. Playing a land, and that is 7 cards in hand. And not even bothering to swing in with the Ledger Shredder, so I think our opponent's playing with his food here. We do see... yeah, we won't bother making the Goblin Matron uncounterable. So that enters, shocks our opponent, and we get a Goblin Tutor, just like in the last game. And we'll just go after the Goblin Recruiter here. I guarantee our opponent's got counter magic available, so yeah, we'll go for Goblin Recruiter being uncounterable. The Ledger Shredder going to trigger again, because that is our second spell. So shooting our opponent again, taking them down to 20. Goblin Recruiter obviously triggers on entry. They discarded a Duress there, by the way. And amazingly, I don't have the Goblin Ringleader in here for some reason, which is a means of getting some decent card advantage with the Goblin Recruiter. Yeah, whatever, we're not winning this one anyway, we're nowhere close. So we'll just go for the Legion War Boss, which can make tokens for us. Sacrificing a food token again at the end of our turn. And then going for the Thrasios Scry. They can put 2 life into Ancient Tomb to sack the food token, but they'd only go up 1 life then, so yeah, not bothering to do that. Making another food with Oko. 2 Thralls, a Skull Clamp, and equipping the Skull Clamp to a Thrall. And that will draw them 2 cards, of course. And again, we'll put them to 12 cards in hand. Now seeing a Mox Diamond for some more mana. And they get rid of Inquisition of Kozilek to the Ledger Shredder trigger, which is now a 4/6 in the air. Clamp on the last Thrall, and 11 cards in hand. We now see a Reliquary Tower. So then it's round to our turn. We obviously know what we're drawing into here. I don't know why they're refusing to swing in with this thing. So we'll just get down an uncounterable Legion War Boss, and then go through to combat. It will make a token. Alright, now we managed to get a Deadly Relic out of our opponent's hand. They could have they could have done that before we get the trigger, so we do get another 2 points of damage on them at least. Because the token does enter, and it does have to attack each combat available, so we'll just hit our opponent's face. They're going to block that anyway. Sack a food, sack a food, and now we see a Gaia's Cradle. Create a food, create Thralls. You'll forgive my commentary, but it's kind of rinse and repeat at this point. Okay, that's something different. A Grist, the Hunger Tide. Activated Thrasios, revealing a Tear Asunder. Insect token was made, and Thrall tokens have been made by the 2 Planeswalkers. And now our opponent swings in with the Ledger Shredder. Okay, Panharmonicon, might as well just throw it out here. Scry with Thrasios. Reveals a Mana Drain this time. I clicked off it, but I think we did see a Wash Away previously as well, so our opponent does have a bunch of counter magic backup, as you would expect. A food token for Oko, an insect token from Grist. See a mystical tutor in the bin here. Another 4 damage from the flyer, and again just passing over to us, so yeah, unlike the first game, we just keep getting into lands now. Oh, and by the way, the Tevesh sat -10 and got control of our Purphoros as well. Yeah, hopefully our opponent will actually win sometime soon. There's a lot of treading of water going on here, so I'll play it out another turn or 2 and hopefully our opponent will actually be able to get the win, especially with all these token generators. Seeing Yavimaya Coast hit play off the Thrasios, and there is a Grim Monolith revealed as well. Landing another land from the Thrasios, and there's another one. So it's through to our opponent's turn now. Making a couple of Thrall tokens will deal 4 damage to us with the Purphoros. So this should reasonably quickly get rid of us here. Another insect token from the Grist is a further 2 points of damage. A Grim Monolith, which we saw from the Thrasios. Alright, and our opponent's starting to turn in sideways here. They can make some red mana thanks to the Mox Diamond. So buffing everything up here will just take the damage, because there's no way in hell we're going to do anything this game. Using the floating mana to scry with Thrasios a few times, which shows a Diabolic Intent and an Elvish Mystic. Like I said, we're just going to take the damage here. And our opponent still doesn't get us. So now casting the second spell would have been the last point of damage that they needed on the Ledger Shredder. But the Elvish Mystic coming down obviously shocks us with the Purphoros, so yeah, let's try one where we can actually do something, shall we? Well, that looks like a pretty fast hand, so we'll keep that one. We finally get into the fast mana that we need. We're on the draw as well. Up against Yasan the Wanderer Bard, by the way, so it looks like all the powerful decks are out today. And our opponent has a Soul Ring of his own, followed by a Mana Vault. Some viewers have said that they want me to not play decks that are as optimal, and because I'm just running the same cards over and over again, and yeah, I mean, we're seeing in these videos why I kind of have to do that on Magic Online, because yeah, there's a lot of people that just want to play the most powerful optimal decks they possibly can, so yeah, it's the only way that we can actually get some games in where we have half a chance of actually competing. Obviously get down a turn 1 Soul Ring into a Ruby Medallion. Our opponent threw down a 1000-year elixir off the Mana Vault there, by the way. So we'll be able to activate Yasan straight away. And there he is. Cannot activate it without any mana though, so just passing the turn with 1 mana held up, I would think. Hopefully doesn't have a Nature's Claim available. Alright, Legion War Boss for us. It's tempting to go for the Jeska's Will for mana, so that we can go Shatter Skull Smashing onto the commander, but all they have to do is drop a land next turn and they'll be able to activate Yisan again, so I think we're okay to go for the Purphoros here. And then do we want to keep hold of the Shatter Skull Smashing just in case we go for that play? We'll go for the Kerkeep here. I don't think there's any harm in bolting that land down next turn if we need double red. Obviously playing out the Jeska's Will next turn as well will allow us to exile the top 3 cards of our library. Might get us into something useful. Yisan being activated for the first time. Decent number of 1 mana hexproof enablers in green, so it could always block our burn onto the Yisan. And searching out a Llanowar Elves with that, which they can tap down for mana straight away thanks to the 1000-year elixir. So that gets our opponent into a prismatic lens. Okay, a Thran Dynamo. So yeah, do we just ramp here? Let's go Ancient Tomb into the Thran Dynamo with the Sol Ring. And then we can play ourselves a Jeska's Will, doing both of those. Point that at our opponent with 3 cards in hand. A 2 mana Jeska's Will leaves us with 2 mana floating. We make 3 red mana. And now we've got a Lotus Petal, which we might as well cast. It's noteworthy our opponent was holding up priority for quite a while there, so could have a means of getting rid of enchantments and or artifacts for free. I forget what that spell is called. Anyway, that does land, so let's go for this Shatter Skull Smashing. And the client didn't ask which mana to use there, so I should have floated Kerkeep mana apparently. I had exactly enough mana floating and it used excess red mana, which I didn't want it to. I don't suppose it matters because we're going for the Goblin Rabble Master, so we would have had to use the Lotus Petal here anyway. Let's go for the Rabble Master, and we're foregoing the Lightning Greaves unfortunately. The first 2 points of damage from the Purphoros onto our opponent. Rabble Master obviously makes a token every turn, so that's another 2 points of damage. And another 1 because the Goblin does have to swing in. But it's noteworthy, our opponent did miss a land last turn. Of course gets into 1 now though. So we'll be able to get down the Yisan again. Of course there was mana from the Prismatic Lens anyway, so could have got it down regardless. Just trying to buy myself some time here. A Faithless Looting. We're still struggling on red mana, so I think we have to do this. Try and get into a mountain. Okay, so we do get into a mountain. We obviously want to keep that. We can flash back the Firecat Blitz if we want to. And let's get rid of the War Chief. Would be nice to keep the War Chief, obviously, but throw down a mountain. And then it's Legion War Boss before combat because we want to be getting down as many tokens as possible. So get our opponent down to 30. And then each of our token generating goblins will trigger. So this will be another 4 points of damage. And I think we can attack him with the Goblin Rabble Master here because they'll lose the Yisan unless they can give it indestructible if they want to block the Rabble Master. That does get buffed up to a 5-2 thanks to the other goblins that are swinging him. So it looks like we're dealing at least 7 points of damage here. Down to under 20. Noteworthy that in the 1v1 room we'd have our opponent starting at 30 life. Both players would start at 30 as opposed to 40. So we'd have our opponent at 8 here if we weren't in the multiplayer room. And of course our opponent has protection from red. And we'll be able to shock something this turn. Does mean he's not activating the Yisan at least. But which goblin do you take out is the question. So obviously foregoing the ability on the Yisan. So drawing a card and getting rid of the Rabble Master, which did deal a decent amount of damage last turn. Now seeing a Gilded Lotus, which is probably worth... Yeah, that's worth getting down here because we can convert our colourless mana into red mana effectively. And let's see what we can do here. We've got the Firecat Blitz in our bin to deal some more damage, so we're going to have to work out combat here. Another 2 points of damage from a goblin entering, and we can obviously buff these goblins as well, thanks to the Purphoros. Mentor onto one of the tokens from the Legion War Boss is a plus counter, so we're dealing 6 damage here, and our opponent untapping a creature, so untapping the Yisan. But we do have to be swinging in here while we've got our opponent on the ropes. So obviously blocking the Legion War Boss. and will not have any damage dealt to the Yisan due to its protection from red. So let's activate the Purphoros. We can only do that once thanks to not having too much red mana, because we want to go for the Firecat Blitz next turn. So yeah, let's just hit our opponent. Actually, I'll go for... Actually, with our opponent being at 9, we're only going to get a couple of tokens. Yeah, instead I'll go for activating the Kerr Keep, I think. Should be able to get our opponent next turn, hopefully, assuming that he doesn't gain any life. He will lose a life to the Mana Vault here, which obviously helps us. Yisan has protection from red, so it swings straight through our token that we'd made with the land anyway, so let our opponent hit. Puts us on 8 commander damage, and it shocks our big goblin. Draws a card as well, goes up to 5 in hand. Now seeing a Birds of Paradise, which can chump block. And Yisan untapping now, so going for an activation on that, most likely. And it's only 1 counter on that because we destroyed it previously, of course, so another Dork here, I would think. That is a Quirion Ranger, so able to untap the Yisan with that. And now seeing another small creature in Gaia's Herald. Not likely to be countering creatures in this deck, but it is another creature that gets in the way. So at the end of the turn, we activate the Kerr Keep in order to make a token. And that will take our opponent down to 6. And there we see a Vandal Blast, which should hurt our opponent quite a bit. But all we ultimately have to do here is go for an activation on the Kerr Keep. And that shocks our opponent down to 4. We'll float this mana from the mountains because we're going to flashback on the Firecat Blitz, sacrificing 2 mountains in order to do that. And that will make a couple of red elementals, which each shock our opponent for 2. And we get them down to 0 exactly. So, yeah, I did not think we'd do well against the Wanderer Bard there, but getting rid of it earlier on bought us enough time, I think. And we had enough mana floating for the Vandal Blast, which really would have hurt our opponent anyway. So, if we don't win here, I think we would have pushed through enough damage. Probably had enough for an Anthem effect on Purphoros as well. But yeah, there were some pretty sketchy games, but hopefully you enjoyed this revisit to an older commander, which some of you have been requesting recently. Purphoros is always an interesting one to see. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.